Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey everybody, it's Jessa. I'm back for another episode of the Better Sex podcast, and I'm so glad you're here with me this week. I go through, as you know if you've listened, tons of different kinds of topics, and I'm always thinking about what would be useful, where can I make an impact with who I interview. And this topic today, I've been wanting to cover this for a while. It's something that I'm aware of as a parent. I've got 3 kids, so I have thought about this in terms of my own children. Certainly, I hear people's stories in therapy about their experiences with this and the various ways, it comes with a huge cost or it goes well, but the impact that this has on people. The topic is coming out. What is it like to realize, first of all, to get the awareness of who you are sexually attracted to realize that maybe that is not what is expected of you, and then to choose or not to go through the process of sharing that with your friends and family and wider world. There's so many different ways it can go. There's so many different ways it can be received. It can go well, it can go poorly, but it's a big deal. And I have found, I think, the perfect person to talk about this today. So Chris Belous is a marriage and family therapist. He's a certified sex therapist. He runs the Couple and Family Therapy Center at Purdue University, where he's also an associate professor. But he's done lots of writing and lots of research and had all kinds of wonderful things to share about coming out. The thinking behind it, the process of doing it, how parents can make this a successful conversations with their kids. So I hope you enjoy. The Better Sex podcast is brought to you by the Sex Without Stress online course. It's a course for couples to escape the cycle of disappointment, avoidance, and pressure in your sex life. So if you're in a pretty good relationship, there's a lot of love and goodwill, but sex is your struggle, this could be for you. You work in the privacy of your own home and at your own pace to create a sex life you can both look forward to. If you want to learn more, go to sexwithoutstress.com/program. Chris, thank you so much for being with me today.
Oh, yeah, no problem. It's my pleasure.
So we're talking about coming out, and I think it's a pretty big topic, right?
Oh, yes.
So, so where do you want to start with sort of setting up the conversation? Because, ideally I want to end up with understanding the struggles for people and giving people some suggestions and tips and, what to expect. But it seems like we might even want to frame this a little bit more in terms of identity and coming to know that about ourselves. Right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I've done a little bit of research in the past about the whole process of coming out. But in my work as a sex therapist and a couple and family therapist, I've actually spent quite a bit of time trying to help people understand and come to a full kind of complete connection between their sexual orientation identity and who they are as a person in the world, and how that relates to how they interact with other people, and the different components of their life all coming together. Yeah, I mean, we could start with chit-chatting about that whole identity formation part.
Yeah.
We could talk about the struggles if you want, or where you want to go. I could talk a little bit about some of that research.
Yeah, I mean, why don't we start with just the sort of identity formation? And I'm intrigued by this idea of not just identifying our sexual orientation, but how does this infuse who we are and how we move through the world?
Yeah, for sure. So, interestingly enough, identity has been something that has, over a very long period of time, been developing. A while ago in the 1970s, and it still is actually the predominant theory of identity formation for sexual orientation. Vivian Cass did some research and developed what was called the Cass identity formation model. And this was a 6-stage process that was very linear. So it was thought that essentially you started with this whole idea of figuring out or kind of realizing that you weren't heterosexual. So it already started with heterosexuality as the norm.
Right.
Per se. And so, and she labeled it confusion, identity confusion, and that you didn't fit with the world around you. And then that led to the second step, which was comparison, which is where as an individual, you started to figure out whether or not you wanted to come out or be true to who you were.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where you really started comparing either like a lesbian, gay, bisexual life with the heterosexual idea of life. And then essentially it was thought that you did kind of a cost benefits analysis. Do I really want to do that?
Okay.
So you sit down and get out your T-chart.
Right. Get out your spreadsheet,
Some weights in there. Then it kind of headed over into tolerance, which is you still have not actually come out yet. But a tolerance component is where you started to kind of tolerate this idea that you were not heterosexual and you came to accept that about yourself, but you weren't quite at acceptance. You simply said, it exists, it's okay. That led into acceptance, which is where you actually did start coming out and you started telling people around you because you accepted that part of who you were. And then the 5th stage is where it got kind of odd. This is one that really feels like it just was stuck in there by Dr. Cass. It's called identity pride. And this is kind of the activist stage.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. So this 5th stage was like, yeah, I'm going to go and I'm going to, march in parades and I'm going to tell everybody who will listen. There's even like aggressive tendencies about coming out and be more belligerent about your sexual identity. But that was not the final stage. The final stage was what she called identity synthesis, which is where actually your identity integrated then with your own personality in the world around you.
Right.
And that's when it was good.
Okay. So this whole model would sort of imply that heterosexual people have no process to go through.
Yeah.
I mean, it reminds me of the sort of racial identity stuff. It's like, white people don't even have to think about it. It's for everybody else. It's like, no, that doesn't make sense to me.
Exactly. And that's one of the biggest critiques about it, that, and just simply the fact that it's kind of the assumptive heterosexual identity to begin with.
Well, right.
And then you need to change.
Yeah, exactly. Everything else is the exception or something.
Right. Yeah. It's so bizarre. And so like a lot of people really don't like this, to tell you the truth.
Right.
And you can understand why.
Yeah.
But it was like in the early 2000s. So really, and I mean, there has been like this huge surge of acceptance around non-heterosexual identities lately. But a couple of other researchers, Horowitz and Newcomb, developed, and this is where I spend most of my time in research and working with people, they called it the multi-dimensional model of sexual identity formation. Mouthful, right?
Right.
But essentially, this is couched in the idea of, social constructionism. So saying that like we get to make meaning out of our identities, and it's more of a fluid cycle process where we don't necessarily, because like in Cass's model, for example, if you were in that pride stage, you couldn't go back and be like,
right.
Here. Whereas within this multidimensional model, it allowed you to kind of go through and think about your own behaviors, desires, and experiences, and kind of pull that together to make meaning of it yourself, as opposed to looking to the external world to try to figure out what stage you were in.
Well, and what category you fall into too, right? Because it seems very different to me. There's our desires and our innate preferences, right? There's our behavior. There's the way we want to identify. Like these are all separate, right?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And that was the number one thing. And this is actually why I really love this model, because unlike the Cass model where you kind of go and the goal is to be like, your happy standard self, you're going to be gay or lesbian. But within this multidimensional model, it says you could identify however you want right now, but it might change in the future. And you're constantly working and thinking about this. And so your identity is always in flux, which I think fits really well with like ideas like, I'm sure you've heard the term like heteroflexible.
Right.
Yeah, and it's kind of like all of these other new kind of wonderful identities that are sprouting up in our culture really have a place. They have a foundation now.
Right, right. Well, and I interviewed Lisa Diamond about, sort of female sexual fluidity and how much our sense of identity and who we're attracted to and want to have sex with, can change over our lifetime. So,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah, brilliant stuff. It's, the thing that I really like about it is that you can really tell the field of mental health, but also just like our culture in general, how it's changed in even such a short period of time, that within the last 40 years, we've gone from very strict rules to just kind of being a little bit more open and accepting. And I think that's profound.
Yeah, I agree. So in your notes to me, you referenced something called the minority stress theory.
Oh, yeah.
Which sounds really important. I've not heard the term, but could you talk about that?
So it was actually originally developed for use with LGBT identities. It has since expanded to allow for more minority identities across culture, race, ethnicity, to be able to utilize it as a foundation. But essentially, when it's utilized within sexual orientation, it's talking about the process of how just simply being a part of a sexual orientation minority is more stressful for the average person than somebody who is cisgender or heterosexual. Mm-hmm. And this was developed by Alan Malian a while ago, but he really kind of put out this whole idea. And one of the crux of it is that LGBT people have to constantly come out. Like, you don't get to just come out one time.
Yeah.
And so there's this constant stress, constant fear for safety, personal safety, psychological safety, emotional safety, acceptance, all of that, as well as, it's all kind of compounding on the person that as they go through their life, they don't get the same advantages, and they have to fight against assumptions constantly. So it's kind of almost a better term would be an exhaustion model.
Yeah. And it seems like there's the phenomenon where you might have to come out repeatedly, but you also might be outed, or you're just dealing with assumptions and prejudice, even if you haven't chosen to be out at work or it just seems like you'd be swimming upstream in so many different ways.
Yeah. And so think about that literally every day, all day of your life. Like, you're under this tremendous amount of stress. And for some people, it's much less impactful. Like, you can think of like maybe larger cities or kind of very progressive or liberal areas of the country, right, where sexual orientation really isn't part of the conversation. But if you go to like maybe, and not to stereotype small towns, but I mean, I grew up in a small town myself. So
okay.
But like if you go somewhere that's maybe a little bit more conservative, or maybe has fewer people, so there isn't as much exposure to diversity,
right?
Like literally as simple as going to the grocery store with a partner, or to find a date, or go out and grab a cup of coffee. It can be really stressful, especially if you have to start fearing for your life, and so which some people do,
right?
And so this whole minority stress theory is a way to simply explain and give words to that experience, and saying that because of that, mental health concerns will, of not personality kind of level mental health concerns, more of like anxiety and depression, will be much higher simply because of the culture that we live in.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me too of the concept of cognitive load. The bandwidth that gets taken up with that stress and that existent in those challenges that then is not necessarily available to thrive and succeed in the rest of your life. I mean, not as much as we would otherwise.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's just, it's kind of a simple concept when you think about it. Like, whenever I talk about it, people are like, oh, well, duh, somebody gave that a name.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's something really true about the things that we name, and get acknowledged, then, I don't know, it makes a difference in our awareness. It gives it power. It gives it, significance.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's why, okay, so all cards on the table disclosure, like, I'm a very kind of postmodern social construction-y kind of guy, and therapist. And so for me, it makes a lot of sense, because I really love the idea of metaphors and symbols in our life and how we make meaning out of that. And so for me, like, it really just connects super well with that multidimensional model we were talking about a little bit ago, where it's like, let's decide what we want this to be and then go forward from there.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you have to worry about all these other layers.
Right. So how do the stresses compare? And this is probably not a simple question. Well, maybe it is. Coming out or not, right? Like it seems to me there are big stresses with, staying in the proverbial closet, but there would be reasons to do that. And that would be a certain kind of stress. And then coming out would be other sets of stresses. Like how do you compare those things?
Yeah, well, and there's actually been quite a bit of research done on this, to tell you the truth, where it's like the decision to come out, which is very heavily influenced by safety, which is couched in this minority stress stuff.
Right.
So there are whole countries in the world where, like, if somebody were to come out, they are most likely going to lose their life.
Yeah.
And then there are places where it's kind of like, oh, you need to come out? Like, why? Just start dating somebody and we'll all figure it out. That's on you. So a person's their decision to come out is very heavily influenced by their family of origin, their own personal values and beliefs, the environment that they live in. So that includes town, their home, whether they have their other needs being met too. So there's a lot of factors that go into the decision. But like in some of the research that I did, for example, I was talking with some gay men about their coming out process. And they eventually said that it wasn't a choice anymore, that they had to at some point. A little over half of them actually talked about how they exhibited very specific stereotypes from the gay community. And so they were the last one to tell everybody that they were out because everybody just kind of guessed already. One of my participants said, and I love this quote, he said he looked at me, and I just remember it very distinctly. It was a few years ago now, but he looked at me right in the eye and he said, "Oh, honey," he's like, "everybody knew. The only closet that I lived in was made of glass and it had a capital G on it." And I was like, okay. Hey, that's fun. If you can recognize that and be okay with that, that's wonderful. But many of them also talked about, the intense fear and anxiety associated with it and not wanting to tell their friends and family, and how their brain would kind of head down this path of, I'm going to be rejected. I'm going to be alone. No one will accept me. I'm going to get hurt in so many different ways. And for many of them, that did happen. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah. And when you say they had to come out, do you mean that in the sense of to be true to themselves, like they just needed to do this? Or do you mean they had to be able to have what they wanted, or a safety issue?
Both, actually. Well, nobody really reported it as something that was required in terms of like for a job or for their own ability to interact in the world. It was more along the lines of like to be true to themselves, to be a little bit happier. Every single one of the respondents, like in my study, for example, said that before they came out, they were unhappy, they were depressed, they were irritable and angry with people. They were even aggressive because they were hiding this huge component of who they are, and they couldn't necessarily cope with all of that.
Right.
And then when they came out, they were able to like really change who they were to be this more authentic person.
Yeah.
So for most of them, it was about that. It was about, just simply being able to be themselves.
Right. So it seems to me that whether this turns out to be positive or negative is going to be largely influenced by safety, right? And the kinds of consequences somebody might face.
Yeah.
Right. Like it seems like the emotional burden would be, it'd be so nice to just be who you are and, not have to pretend anymore. That would be a huge benefit as long as it doesn't come at too high a cost. Right?
Well, and honestly, to tell you the truth, the largest influence on people's decision to come out, like that scared them the most, I thought it was going to be things like work or, being able to obtain successes in life that they've identified. But in reality, almost all of them said that they were scared about how their parents would react and how their family, or the rest of their family, but also their friends would react.
Oh. So the personal cost of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the major barrier to coming out. It wasn't necessarily the world at large. It was the relationships that they were a part of.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there, I mean, is there a way to do, there's probably not a way to do this, but I mean, are there strategies that set people up for more success or sort of pave the way in these relationships? I mean, obviously so much is going to be dependent on your parents and
Yeah, that's
cultural
actually,
environment, but
that's the thing. I think it really starts with outside of the person who needs to come out. I think you know, my dream would be for our culture to turn into one where parents are very supportive from birth of children's choices, whether that be through gender or sexual orientation identity, and that there's just this support and acceptance of people's expressions. Now, if those things existed, the whole process of coming out and deciding to be a more genuine version of yourself wouldn't be a concern for most people because it would just be.
yeah.
However, I also know that that's probably not going to happen in my lifetime. We can cross our fingers, but we can. That's probably what it's going to be as a cross.
Well, it happens in certain, it happens in families, right? In some places, not in others. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But for the person who's coming out, like in today's world, there's lots of advice. There's lots of stuff online. I say always take that with a grain of salt, just a little bit, because it's usually based in one person's either really great experience or really bad experience.
Yeah.
We've all seen the YouTube videos, about coming out to dad, coming out to mom, coming out to friends, and things like that. And yes, watch those, sure. But just know that those aren't necessarily always going to be reality.
Yeah.
And so really take a step back. And as you're considering it, consider the relationships, the people around you. Find the person who you think is going to be the most safe person, whether that be a therapist. That's always a great idea.
Yeah.
Or talking with like a friend who is very supportive and affirmative as an ally to the community. And the first time that you come out is to another person is going to be the most difficult. So that's kind of ripping the Band-Aid off.
Okay.
But before that, there's nothing wrong with practicing it with yourself.
Okay.
In a safe location as well. Look in the mirror and repeat words to yourself, like think about how you would want the speech to go, and really kind of like practice it up so that way there you feel a little bit more confident. And then after that first time that you disclose to somebody who you trust, it's almost like an immediate burden off your shoulders because somebody knows besides you.
Yeah.
There's some place where you can be authentic. And so then you can start to explore and think about your life in all kinds of different ways. And slowly over time, as you feel comfortable, you'll start to, disclose to more and more people.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much your best hope. But like you start with always really considering safety and then working through the people that you can feel most confident are going to be affirmative and supportive.
Yeah, and the visual I have of this is you almost get people lining up behind you, with you as allies and as support as you maybe make each person that maybe is a little bit more challenging, right? But you're gathering a team, ideally.
Yeah.
Right? Your loved ones and friends and therapist or whoever.
I've actually had I've had a couple of people who've been I've had a couple of parents come in to see me and they've said, oh, I don't have a problem that my child is not heterosexual, but the thing I'm most upset about is the fact that they told their friends first.
Oh.
They wanted to be the first to know, and so their feelings got hurt. That
right.
Friends, which I always find a little bit interesting because when I was growing up, that would have not been anybody's reactions.
Yeah, you're right.
But, yeah.
But I can imagine that. Hey, it's Jessa. I'm just taking a little break to invite you to my free monthly webinars that I do on a variety of topics that always include an open Q&A session with me at the end. I'm doing these monthly. If you want to hear about them, be invited so you can register. Make sure you join my mailing list. You can go to bettersexpodcast.com/list. Do you have ideas about, let's say it doesn't go well, with a friend, with a parent, with a, I mean, certainly I've heard the stories as a therapist, some of these families cut them off or they, have no relationship now. But are there thoughts you have about how to handle those kinds of breaks or?
Yeah, so part of the kind of safety assessment that I recommend with anybody is considering the context of your environment too. So if you're a minor, if you have no way to care for yourself in a worst case scenario, as much as it pains me to say it, you may want to delay your coming out process until you're in a place where you can care for yourself first. Mm-hmm. Because the unfortunate thing is that a lot of the homeless adolescent and youth population as a direct result of sexual and gender minority status. And so parents won't accept them and ask them to leave the house.
Oh, gosh.
Then that results in a domino effect where even more risky behavior occurs. A lot of people can be led into the sex work industry without their choice, drugs, other kinds of risky behaviors like who to stay with, where to stay. And so it can really cut someone's life expectancy rather short. So part of that assessing for safety and everything is also understanding and knowing that if things go horridly wrong, you have some place to go.
Yeah.
Whether that be your own place or that be someone who can take you in and support you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. What about how the different ways somebody may be, in a minority population? Are there different stigmas? Are there different challenges based on, what you're coming out with?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So this could be a whole podcast in itself.
Okay.
So you have to think of the kind of the standard stereotypes. So human beings, we really like the idea of this or that, A or B.
Right.
And so when somebody is not A or B, then what happens is we want them to fit still inside that mold. So when people come out as a male who's gay, they want them to fit inside the mold of attraction to other men. So immediately we place them into feminine stereotypes. Mm-hmm. We talk about their voice, their dress. We make assumptions based on skincare or shopping, for example. That was one that's always brought up. People talk about wanting to have a gay best friend so they have someone to go shopping with. And it's it's not a thing. But yeah, there's a ton of stereotypes that can also hinder a lot of people's decision to come out, because if you feel like who you are not these stereotypes, then are you actually that person or that identity? A lot of people that I've worked with have talked about that and about how they didn't fit this mold that they saw in media or on TV or what their friends were saying or other people that they know of that identity. And so they felt like there was no way that could be them. So they must just be confused. Yeah,
as if there's one thing a gay man is.
Yeah. And so the same is true, though, for lesbian women.
Right.
We place them into wanting to be in the loving women role. And so they have to be very masculine. And so, we look at them and, we talk about things like having the, a butch haircut or something if they've got too short of hair, or if they wear men's clothes or use a wallet instead of a purse, then that must mean that they are, for some reason, lesbian.
Right.
Simply wanting to carry around their cards in a more convenient way.
Yeah.
But I'd have to say probably the most painful thing that occurs is when you're not, because that's still
a binary, right? Gay, lesbian, it's that's how we categorize that. Yeah.
And when you fall outside of that, like saying to bisexuality, pansexuality, and we could kind of fall down a path of things like demisexuality, asexuality, and onward. But when you think about bisexuality or pansexuality, there's not only a stigma that they face in everyday life, but they don't fit into one or the other box. They're somewhere in the middle in terms of their attraction, like who they want to be with. And so everyone across the board pushes stereotypes and stigma on them. Heterosexual people in the gay community and lesbian community, they also and then all the other communities kind of gang up on them that don't fit. I'm working with a student right now who is doing a thesis on the concept of bi-erasure. So it's the erasing of someone's bisexual identity when they're in a different gendered relationship.
Right, right.
And so if we connect back with that minority stress stuff we were talking about, imagine being in a relationship as a man with a woman, and one of you or both of you potentially identify as bisexual, but everywhere you go, heterosexuality is assumed.
Right.
To where you have to make the decision to overtly talk about the fact that you don't fit into what is presented.
Right. And that choice all the time, right? Do I just accept this assumption and, have them not see me, or do I need to go out,
Absolutely.
on a limb and broadcast this again? Yeah.
Along with all of that privilege that comes with it too.
Right.
Because if you think about it and you walk somewhere, everyone's like, oh, you two are a couple, and there's like things that come along with that, versus if you're out with, say, a man as a man and you're on a date, most people are like, oh, brothers? Oh, are you guys friends? Like, are you out trying to find somebody? And then you have to talk about the fact that you're in a romantic relationship, but then also talk about the fact that your identity is not gay enough.
Well, I mean, this also raises, just a question about why do we have to come out at all? I mean, first of all, it's I don't think it's generally assumed that heterosexual people are going to come out.
No.
Right. So it's not even something that whatever, percentage of the population even has to do. And then why does anybody else even have to let anybody else know what they're doing? It's really,
right.
It's such a conundrum.
It's like an unspoken rule that if you're not part of the majority, you have to express your minority status.
Right. Right.
Which is not helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah. I've tried in my own, this is personal, but with my own children, I've tried to sort of set the stage from the very beginning that at some point you're all going to understand who you're attracted to and what your orientation is. And I can't wait to hear it and celebrate it with you, just as much for my kids who are straight as, the one that isn't. And
right.
Try, like, I think you were trying to say, make it all, this is all accepted. It's all something to be celebrated. It's just as much something that somebody should do if they're heterosexual versus not. And
yeah, and it can even change. Like, there's so many people that, because there really isn't like an age. It's kind of like the whole idea of, a drinking age or a driving age or something, which has some biological influence. But it's the idea of like, once you reach a point, you get to declare.
Right. On your 16th birthday, you can let me know. Right.
But it doesn't. It changes.
Yeah.
And sometimes you never know because you don't consider it.
Right.
But I just want to say, like, I'm like so excited that that's what you do with your children. Like, that's so amazing. I love hearing stories like that, from people who have children and doing all the great things that are going to help make better human beings.
Yeah. Yeah. So on that note, what kind of advice, I guess, or information would you share with parents who, either have had a child come out to them, or they wonder, or they just want to be, prepared? Yeah. Like, what would you say?
I would say that if a child comes out to you, let's back that up even a little bit more. And I'd say the moment that you find out that you're going to have a child, start thinking about the way that you want to be a parent. A lot of people think about that, but they don't actually consider it when it's a reality. And they kind of wing it as they go through the whole process of raising another human being. Take some time to sit down and say, what is it? What are the values that I want to give? And how do I want this little person to be as another human being? Do I want them to be accepting and open and okay with the world around them and not judgmental? Do I want them to understand our feelings and our beliefs as a family unit around certain things? But I do always want them to know how much I will love and support them. Or as a parent, is there a hard line where this is unacceptable? And if this is 100% unacceptable for you, then maybe start talking with people about it, like therapists, other parents, just simply because if you're not prepared for it, you're not going to react well. And so, like when my sister started having children, I said, I would talk with her and I would say, you got to think about everything that's going to happen. You got to think that like your child, when they're born, is going to turn 12, and this is such a random idea, but like find a heroin needle on the street, stick it in their arm, and they're a heroin addict for the rest of their life. I don't know. I mean, you never know exactly what's going to happen.
Right.
So it's kind of like, think about scenarios, not to freak yourself out and be hyper worried or anxious all the time, but to think about, is there anything that's going to make me love this human being any less?
Yeah.
And does it matter what they do to
Right.
make me love them any less?
Right.
But so if a kid, like, let's say that, your kid turns 12, 13, 14, 15, and comes home and says, hey, I think that I'm attracted to men, or I'm attracted to women, or I don't know what I'm attracted to. Maybe I'm not attracted to anything. The number one thing to do is to be as supportive as possible, but also you don't want to necessarily over or underreact. So it's kind of like a weird timeline. Nobody's going to do it right. First of all, nobody's going to do it right. But what you can do is you can look at your child. And one of the things that I always find most curious is when parents say, I still love you, in terms of like, because that kind of intimates that maybe they wouldn't have, or
right. This is something that would affect that. Yeah.
And so I always say, like, tell your child that I'm proud of you for being able to come to this realization, like alternatives to phrases that you can have canned up that will work. And then what you do is, I would say, once you do find out, no matter how much preparation you do or where you're at and your own supportive continuum in your life, be nice to the kid, and then take some time for yourself. Because no matter what, parents always imagine and plan their child's life, and they have hopes and dreams for them. And whatever decisions they make alters the path. It doesn't mean it's going to wipe the slate, but the path for getting to certain places are different.
Yeah.
So a lot of people who have gay and lesbian children will say, well, I'm just so sad because I wanted to be a grandparent. And just someone's sexual orientation has no bearing on whether or not they have children.
Right. But it reminds me that really any change involves loss.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the idea that we have this image of our kid married with an opposite sex person having babies in a certain way, and, even though it may not be worse in any way, there could still be a little bit of loss or grieving of letting go of that vision, that fantasy, right, for parents.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's it hasn't really been extended in research yet, but even the whole idea of minority stress out in the family, like, having pictures of your child at work on your desk with their same gender partner, potentially, and people saying, who's that? Are those your children or something? And you have to say, no, that's my daughter and her wife, or, whatever.
Right.
There's a lot of stress that goes along with that as well. Yeah. And so not only is there the grieving process of kind of this thought you had of how things will go, but then the stress on you of how your life continues.
Yeah. And do you have any thoughts about parents who maybe their child is in that glass closet, who basically suspect or know or wonder about their child maybe being gay or lesbian or bi or whatever, but the child hasn't brought that to them yet?
Yeah, I would say do what you can to be as supportive of the culture as possible. And also the reason why we think that a glass closet exists is because of stereotypes.
Right.
The different identities, right? So your child could be incredibly heterosexual, and have no desire whatsoever to have a sexual or romantic relationship with someone of the same gender. But because of the way that they interact in the world, people will assume it constantly.
Yeah.
So it always starts with, positive communication, sitting down and having talks, being as supportive as possible. You can incorporate different expressions into your home and family life. That would be great. So there's a lot of media available right now. Like when you go into Netflix, for example, there's a whole category for LGBTQ movies and TV shows and documentaries. When you're watching a non-specific LGBTQ show, but one of the characters happens to be non-heterosexual, talk about it.
Yeah.
Talk about it with your family and say, that's really cool. Even just small statements like, oh, I'm really happy that they're happy.
Yeah.
Statements like that.
Right. So you're demonstrating it's so similar to how I want to coach parents to talk about sex too, right? Just sort of keep it on the table, make it, demonstrate that you're open to those conversations and those ideas.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's if you, and I would challenge everybody, like listeners and you and everybody, and I do this with my clients too. I say, think back to some early memories that you have. What is it that you remember? It's not necessarily, it's either like some kind of like physical activity with somebody, like hugs or holding hands with your grandparent walking down the road, but it's also little utterances where it had an impact on you.
Yeah.
Where you're sitting on the couch and somebody said, "Oh, that person's pretty," or something like that. And you're like, "Oh," or, like you come home and it's the little things that people just really don't realize. When you bring home a report card and one of your parents are maybe cooking dinner or something and they're incredibly, incredibly busy and they say, "Oh, that's great, honey, just put it on the fridge."
Right.
Like, "Oh, I worked really hard for that."
Yeah.
Pay attention to me.
Yeah.
Those are the things that you remember. And so every little bit that you can do may or may not be the one thing that has a super long-term impact.
Right. Cool. So I want to give you just a moment to talk about where people can learn more about you or get in touch or anything you want to, share about what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So, a little bit about me. I'm an associate professor at Purdue University Northwest, and I have a rather small private practice that I do, on the side. So I serve as the clinical director for our marriage and family therapy program here, working with students, teaching classes, doing research. I direct our on-site clinic. I'm a little busy.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
So people can go to thebsi.org, thebsi.org. That's my kind of website on the side where I talk about my practice and the things that I do. But also, if you if you want to read anything about like my articles or research or anything, you can look me up on Google. I mean, that sounds really silly to say, but you can do things like that. You can also find me on the PNW website, which is just pnw.edu, and then search for me or my name. And if you can't get access to anything, it's really important for me, for clinicians, for parents, for people in the world. I don't think it's quite fair that the work that we do is usually behind this kind of academic wall where you can't have this unless you pay a lot of money or are part of an institution. So if anybody wants anything of mine, I'm happy to share that information with them. I do quite a few talks. Like I was at the American Association for Sex Education, Counseling, and Therapists last year in Philadelphia. I plan on going again this year. We'll be in Palm Springs. So that's
Great.
A lot of fun. But yeah, I'm kind of around. And if anybody's in the Northwest Indiana area, I'm happy to meet with anybody.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for being with me.
Yeah, it's been no problem. I really loved this. This is wonderful. And I love the work that you do. So thank you so much for inviting me on.
You are welcome.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.